Welcome to the We Talk Sports Podcast. I'm Luke Hitchcock, and with me we have
Anthony Da Silva.
And Dominic Wright.
So today we'll be recapping the NFL draft, which is now complete. Everybody will give us their favorite picks, their steals, who they thought were reaches, and what they think basically of the overall draft. And then we'll finish the show talking about NASCAR because we haven't hit on that yet on this podcast. We'll discuss the last 2 weeks, both Talladega and Dover. And we'll open with you, Anthony, on who do you think was the biggest reach in the draft this year?
I think everyone can agree when I say this. Michael Penix Jr. was a surprise pick and a reach. You just gave Kirk Cousins a 4-year, I think it was $180 million guaranteed contract, and you go out and take a quarterback in the first round. What are you doing?
This is an idea that I have a huge agreement with. So listening to NFL insiders on ESPN and what the thought process was behind this pick is Atlanta believes that Penix was a top 10 pick, which I think most people agree that he wasn't.
Yeah, he was a low, early second
round guy is what most people had him graded as, correct. And they also feel like they won't be picking this early in the draft for a long time because of Kirk Cousins. Now, the interesting part about this, and the reason why I do agree with you on this, is Kirk Cousins did just sign a 4-year contract for $180 million, and $100 of it was guaranteed. So it's $100 million guaranteed. So you know they're not going to cut him or release him.
Yeah.
And be in the same situation Denver is with Russell Wilson. But then throw in the fact that Penix is one of the oldest quarterbacks coming out of the draft. He's 24 at the beginning of this year, which means by time Kirk Cousins' contract expires, he's going to be 28.
If you're going to do this, you should have done this with a younger quarterback, someone who's like 21, 22, because 28 by the time they end the contract, it's just old. He's going to play maybe a couple more years and just be done. Like, if he's successful, he's going to sit for 2-3 years. Like, that's just not going to happen. Like, that's just a waste of a pick when he could have spent that pick getting high talent to improve the team and go into the playoffs and maybe go farther and help your team like you said you were. Like, I heard something that the Falcons were trying to trade back into the first round to get Latu, but you could have just used your pick to draft him instead of drafting a quarterback that's just going to sit on the bench and would have been there later and in a much later round and try to trade back in to get him if you really felt like you really needed that quarterback.
So I also feel like Atlanta, being the first off-the-wall pick, surprising everybody by taking Penix, did create a chain reaction in the draft. This was a historic draft in the fact that no defensive player was taken in the top 14. And it's only the second draft in history to have 6 quarterbacks taken in the first round.
First 12 picks, and the quarterback wasn't taken for another 130, 140 picks. Then.
It created the longest gap in between a quarterback ever being picked. Exactly. That's exactly what I was getting at. But also, the first draft that had 6 quarterbacks taken was the 83 draft. And the 6th quarterback drafted in that draft was, and I'm just going from memory here because I don't have it written down, I want to say it was 27th overall. It was 26th or 27th, and it was Dan Marino. That draft had 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks in it, but they weren't picked in the top 12. They were picked throughout. And what I found funny about that draft was they talk about the 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Well, 2 of them were Jim Kelly and Dan Marino, neither of which have a Super Bowl. So great that they're Hall of Famers, but the last draft with 6 quarterbacks didn't create very many Super Bowl championships. I'm just throwing that one out there for this. But what I think it did was, as the draft trickled down, there were 6 teams in this draft that people thought were going to go after quarterbacks. When Atlanta selected a quarterback, because they weren't one of those 6 teams, when the Raiders came on the clock, everybody thought that they were actually going to go for Michael Penix Jr. Like, everything I read going up to the draft linked Michael Penix Jr. to the Raiders. That was their guy. That's who they thought they would get. But by the time they came up on the clock, all 6 quarterbacks were gone. So they're sitting there at 13. So then do you go best player available or do you go need? And with the Raiders, the need that I saw the most, other than quarterback, would be offensive line.
And there's plenty of offensive line on the board talent-wise that they could have taken, but for some reason they decided to just go best available and take Brock Bowers. Now when they already had Michael Mayer from last year, so you took one of the top tight ends from last year in the draft, and then you take the best one in this year's draft. You have a stacked tight end room, but like your offensive line is still kind of trash.
And to kind of caveat off of that, the very next pick in the draft was the Saints, who took offensive tackle Fuaga out of Oregon. So like the tackle was there for you, and they didn't go tackle.
But what else is new? That's just typical Raiders in the draft.
It is, but it isn't. And here's why I will say. So where the Raiders draft was different this year from past is the Raiders went and drafted best player available. Now, do we need a tight end? Debatable. I don't know if the Raiders needed a tight end. Michael Mayer had a pretty good rookie year. Nothing flashy, nothing. He didn't have a 1,000-yard year. But if you look at most of the great tight ends in the league, none of them had 1,000-yard rookie seasons. And he had a really good rookie season on a team that had Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. So, like, you're also fighting with two great receivers. And he had a really good season. But now you bring in the top tight end in Bowers. So now you have two tight ends. It makes me wonder if they're going to run 11 personnel. And the reason I think this differs from past drafts is in past drafts, because the Raiders pick in the top 10 a lot. This time they're not in the top 10. They're 13th. Part of that is because they won a couple games at the end of the season.
And 13 is such a unique spot because that's a spot where it's like the top talent is gone at that point.
It's gone.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be.
And then like I feel like 12 to like 19 is such an odd spot to be in the draft because there's like so many different directions you can go in because the generation talent's gone. But do you pick for need or best available? Do you trade down? Like, what do you do? Because sometimes it feels like you're reaching with certain players, and other times you're like, sometimes it's just like you don't really know what to do in that spot. Because the Texans were in that spot a couple years ago. They traded down and still ended up reaching for a player.
And that's where I feel like this draft might have been a little bit different because, like you said, in years past, if you're picking at 12, the cream of the crop is gone. Like they're not there anymore. Your elite level players. But if you look at actual big boards that a lot of teams had, and that a lot of the draft analysts have for ESPN, Fox, anywhere you look, they had Brock Bowers anywhere from 2 to 4 as best player in the draft.
Oh, really?
And the fact that he was still there at 13 is crazy because teams went with need. They went with quarterback, they went with wide receiver, and they went with offensive lineman.
But usually, like the best teams that take best available are usually teams later in the draft because they have most of they were successful last year. They retained most of their roster, and they're just like, no, we don't really need a position here, and we're not going to reach for that. Let's just take best available and make our team better. And that's a surprising move for a team that has several roster holes they need to be filled.
Exactly. Now, with that being said, there was also plenty of available defensive players. If you want to talk about generational talent or just top 10 talent on big boards, there were 4 defensive players in this draft that were considered top 10 players, with the first one not even coming off the board until 15. So that makes me wonder, one, again, what the heck Atlanta was thinking. And 2, if you weren't going to take a lineman in the first round as the Raiders, I don't think they needed the tight end. They need help on defense as well. Even though they did sign the defensive tackle out of Miami and they have Crosby on defensive end, they could use another defensive end on the other side. The dudes that they're filling in over there, it doesn't make sense to me. But what that does is it trickles down even further in the draft. And what I'm surprised is the fact that no defensive player taken until 15. And then there's just a run.
Yeah.
Defensive players just start coming off the board left and right. And this is what I call the rich getting richer, because once you get past pick, like 18, I think it is?
Yeah, that's all playoff teams.
That's all playoff teams. And they're getting the best available defensive players in this draft? Like, are you kidding me?
Like the Eagles, they got 2 great corners in this draft.
And that's the
They got 2 of the top 3 corners in this draft. Right? They
did.
Yeah, they
They
got
absolutely
I don't know if it's their first name, but the corner from Toledo.
Quinyon Mitchell.
Yeah, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. I'm like,
And Cooper DeJean was a steal.
yeah.
The fact that he was so on most people's big boards, they had him as the top corner in the NFL or in the draft. But the reason he wasn't selected, if we're being honest, is because he's white, and people don't think white people can play corner. And
Well, I was actually talking to one of my buddies, Patrick, and he was saying he watched film on Cooper DeJean, and the biggest problem is he freezes for a split second off the snap. So he could possibly get beat right off the snap.
he could, but he's also one of the fastest corners in the draft.
Yeah, so he can make up that
He
space.
can make up that.
But that's a little variable because the speed's a lot faster in the NFL than in college too. So if he can make up that speed, that's great. But if he's getting beat kind of off the snap, it's gonna be tough because you have to be quick and react.
That is true. And I will say that the one trend that was broken in this draft that I thought was hilarious is it's the first draft under the current Eagles management where they didn't select a single defender from Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just throwing that out there. Like every year they get a dude from Georgia, and it's a steal of a deal. It's a dude that falls in the draft to them. That didn't happen this year. I don't know if it's because there weren't as many Georgia players in the draft or if they didn't grade him as high. But this was the first year that they didn't take a single player from Georgia defense.
Mm.
So going further down in the first round, I think the last surprise of the first round was the Bills trading back and then trading out of the first round, knowing they needed wide receivers. The surprise necessarily isn't the fact that they traded back. It's who they traded back with that I think a lot of people surprised, because I don't think that Xavier Worthy is a fit in Buffalo.
Yeah, he would not fit in Buffalo whatsoever. He has personality problems, and especially now that you just got rid of Diggs, which was one of the personality problems, you want to bring in someone that doesn't have problems and be a perfect fit personality-wise in Buffalo.
Exactly. But by trading back, you allow Kansas City to pick up the fastest dude in NFL Combine history.
Basically, Tyreek Hill 2.0.
2.0. He had a faster 40 time than Tyreek Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
well, that's 40 time. That's different than game speed, so we'll see.
it is.
He was fast in college, but I always feel like the combine is misleading. I find the combine very because who was the what's the guy who broke the 40 record like 5-6 years ago? I think was it Justin Ross or something like that? He was from Washington. He was the fastest in the draft. Then he came to the NFL and was a complete bust. He played for the Bengals. And then there's players that aren't that don't have great 40 times like last year. Puka Nacua and Tank Dell had terrible 40 times. Tank Dell, watch him in the game, he can burn you. He burned you in games. Puka Nacua, great at getting open. He's great at getting open. And that's why those were two of the best receivers in the class. You got work with game film and 40. See what those correlate. Because 40, I guess, can show you what their bursts are, but not their consistent speed throughout the whole game. Is what I'm trying to see. Game speed tells you how much they're playing and how fast they actually are against other players in the game and with all the equipment on and everything.
So one thing I will say with that I found interesting while watching the draft and listening to how the Rams make their selections, and it's weird to think about because the Rams put almost zero stock in the actual combine. They pay little to no attention to the combine, and they pay even less attention to your scripted pro days. They don't care about that. That is not how they base the
They go
draft.
by game speed.
So they go by game speed, but they have a set way of grading players by watching film. And it's not necessarily all analytics, but it is analytic driven by only what they see on the field.
And that has worked for them. The past two drafts, they've had fifth-round steals that have Kyron Williams, I think it was fifth round 2 years ago, and Puka Nacua last year. It just works out because they had to invest in those late-round picks because they had no first-round picks to use. So they needed to really analyze the later round picks that probably didn't get combine invites or didn't get to see much in the combine. And Pro Day, it's unreliable because they just adjust whatever, because Pro Day is, I think, is the most unreliable thing ever.
Completely scripted,
Yeah.
and it's why McCarthy got picked where he got picked, because before his Pro Day, he was considered a 3rd to 4th round quarterback. And then after his Pro Day, everybody came out and was like, this dude can throw a football. Well, why didn't he do it in football games? Like, he can do it in a scripted scenario where there's no defense, there's no pressure.
J.J. McCarthy, in my opinion, is one of the better quarterbacks in this class. I really think J.J. McCarthy has what it needs to be an NFL quarterback. He has the leadership skills that you need in a locker room to lead a team. And also, like, the reason why he didn't throw the ball at Michigan is because he didn't have to. He didn't need to throw the football. Michigan had the best run offense. They had the great offensive line that created gaping holes. So why take a chance at throwing the ball if you don't need to throw the ball? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And when he had to throw the ball, he was pretty successful at it. There's only one game he really struggled in all season. And that was like, it was Bowling Green, but it was all really deep shots that were questionable calls on the offense. And that was the game that Coach Harbaugh was not coaching.
Well, he's going to have to take deep shots this year because he's got Justin Jefferson, and he likes those deep shots.
He can still take deep shots, just not as accurate with them. That's his weakest point. Middle to short, he has pinpoint accuracy, because I've seen some throws to Roman Wilson and other wide receivers on that team where it was perfect. It was perfectly placed. But deep shots he can hit the deep shots. It's just a little not 100% accurate on those. But he is smarter at throwing the ball than other quarterbacks. He doesn't make terrible decisions.
So I think the next thing we can look at, I think we've discussed this pretty well. The next thing we should look at that we didn't talk about that I kind of want to bring up real quick, and we did discuss this a little bit actually. There were a few, in my opinion, second-round steals, and I'll just point out a couple of them, and either one of you can tell me what you think of these. The first one, I thought Keon Coleman falling to Buffalo as the first pick in the second round. That was a great prize, I guess, for them to trade back, because in the end they got the receiver that they were going to pick regardless.
Yeah.
And they did get a few extra picks.
Keon Coleman, I thought, was he was my number 3 wide receiver on the board. I had him much higher than any of the Texas receivers, Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, because Keon Coleman has a little bit of everything, which is what I like. He has a great personality. He's a perfect fit for Buffalo. We all know Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best wide receiver in the class, but there's some other picks that are after Marvin Harrison, it's a big drop off, and you can kind of put the wide receivers however you like them. But Keon Coleman, I just like. He's a wide receiver I enjoy watching to play.
So, and then you go a little bit further into the second round, and one thing that surprised a lot of people after day one is the number of corners that they thought were first-round graded corners that were still available in the second round.
I'm surprised how far Kool-Aid fell.
And that's where I was looking right at those 2 picks right there. Eagles, we already talked about getting Cooper DeJean with the 8th overall pick in the second round. And then in the 9th pick of the second round, New Orleans gets Kool-Aid McKinstry, who everybody had graded as a first round.
And then don't forget about the pick after him, Lassiter. He's a very underrated corner. He didn't have a lot of picks, but he is a lockdown corner that can tackle. He's going to fit perfectly right alongside Derek Stingley. They're both lockdown corners that can tackle and don't give up a whole lot.
So to me, this was a result of 14 straight offensive players coming off the board. In the first round, it left
it's a
really good players in the second round. Now, Dom, I know you had something you wanted to talk about with Kool-Aid, who I feel was a steal in the second round. I thought he was a first-round pick. And then he winds up going to New Orleans, which I think is a great pick for him because they have a defensive-minded head coach. They have really good pieces on defense, and I think Kool-Aid is just a plug-and-play type player on that defense.
Yeah, I think with a name with Kool-Aid, you kind of expect people to want him a bit more. Just scrolling through social media, just all the hype around, we want Kool-Aid, we want Kool-Aid. And Green Bay correct me if I'm wrong, they traded that pick to New Orleans. Or traded a pick.
It was traded from the Jets to Green Bay and then from Green Bay to New Orleans. So that pick was traded twice.
Yeah. I heard some very angry Packers fans, but...
Yeah, and considering Green Bay has a history of drafting some players with interesting names. Because how long ago did Ha Clinton Dix come out? Remember that?
Yes, that one made me laugh when I heard his name because his name was Ha.
Yeah, I'm like, that would be a Packers pick. Kool-Aid. Imagine if Clinton Dix was still around on that team. That'd be funny having Kool-Aid and both Alabama players on the same team.
On the same team.
That would be great. But, Kool-Aid just announced a special flavor for Kool-Aid McKinstry, I believe, the Black Cherry Blitz. How does that make you guys feel?
Where can I buy it?
That's what I want to know. Like,
yeah,
I think that's great branding of himself, and I think that it's genius. My question is what brand is picking that up, and what is his royalties off of it? Because that's brilliant. I would have done the exact same thing.
Yeah, good move by Kool-Aid.
Exactly. So now let's talk about what we thought were just absolutely knockout great picks in the draft. Who do you think was the best overall steal anywhere in the draft? It could be first round, second round. Like, who do you think was the steal of the draft, and why?
I was surprised how far Brendan Rice fell. I think he wasn't picked until late in the 6th or 7th round. Like, I thought he would be like a 3rd or 4th round pick, considering he's just Jerry Rice's son. Like, how just because his name is attached to him, I thought he would be higher. And he had a great season, unlike the LeBron's son, who's terrible and somehow is still going into the draft. He sucks and he entered the draft, but Brendan Rice was really good last season. He had like almost 18 yards a catch, and I think he was like, he had a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns last season too. So the fact that he fell, and I think he got drafted to the Chargers, am I right? Yes, he did. He went to the Chargers at pick number 225, which is that the 7th round, or is that the 6th? I don't really know.
225 should be the 6th round because of all the competition.
Yes. So the fact that he fell that far is really impressive. I thought he would go much higher. So, like, what do you think about, like, that pick?
I'm torn when it comes to I consider these legacy picks when you have a son of a great coming in. I don't necessarily think that he's gonna be an elite just because he's Randy Moss's son. But I do think
Jerry Rice?
Jerry Rice's son. My bad. Randy Moss's kids ain't old enough to be in the draft yet. But I don't know with that one because to me, going back to basketball, like a lot of the basketball players' kids aren't very good at basketball.
Yeah, like LeBron's kids suck, but Jerry Rice's kid is actually pretty solid. So I finally pulled up his stats. This past season, he had 45 catches for 791 yards and 12 touchdowns.
I mean, I think that's a late round pick with those stats in college because those are college stats. And where did he go to college?
USC.
Oh, so he actually went to a good college.
Yeah, he went to a top tier program. So
I think
in the previous year, he had 4 touchdowns on 611 on 39 catches. So
I think we'll find out very fast whether or not that was a steal, seeing as how the Chargers basically got rid of their entire receiver room in this offseason. So it gives him room to come in and compete immediately.
Yeah.
So that could turn out to be the steal of the draft.
Yeah, if he turned out to be great.
If he turns out, honestly, if he gets 800 yards a season getting picked in the 6th round, that's a steal.
Yeah.
You don't have to be an elite to be a steal, in my opinion. Dudes that make an impact in year 1 from rounds 5, 6, and 7 are steals because normally your 5, 6, and 7 wind up on the practice squad and don't even get playing time. So if he makes it onto the field in year 1 and is productive, even middle of the back productive, that is a steal of a pick. Like that is a really good use of a 6th round pick.
Like last year, the Texans they had some injury problems and they had their 5th or 6th round pick from that year, center, starting, and he did pretty solid. I think his name was Jarrett Patterson. He was starting, I think the third week of the season he was playing I think he started week 1 because Juice Scruggs got hurt, and their starting center was hurt too. So you had coming into week 1, you had a rookie 6th round center starting. That's insane.
That is insane.
Yeah.
Dom, did you have a steal of the draft that you wanted to talk about?
I did not have a steal of a draft, but I have a name I want to throw out there and hear some opinions. What's the consensus on Bo Nix going to the Broncos? You know,
I heard Bo Nix was the Broncos guy, but Bo Nix I don't think is going to be very successful in the NFL. I don't think he is. And the Broncos don't have a great history of picking quarterbacks.
True.
So
I personally believe that if you look at Denver with Bo Nix, they have Wilson from the Jets.
Yep.
And they have Stidham, who was their backup last year. Stidham is the best quarterback in that quarterback room, and that's my hot take, right? Like Stidham is a dude drafted. I can't remember if he was a late round draft pick of the Patriots, or if he was undrafted. Like Stidham started with the Patriots, was traded to the Raiders when McDaniels went to the Raiders. Started 2 games with the Raiders. Set a single season or a single game yards record as a quarterback for the Raiders in those 2 games, throwing over 500 and some yards in a game. And then the Raiders didn't re-sign him, and he signed with Denver. I think
was that the game that the Raiders put all the points up on the Chargers that he had 500 something yards, or was that a different game?
It was the last 2 games of the season. It's when they sat Derek Carr so he wouldn't get hurt, so they could cut him at the end of the season.
Oh, this was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
All right. I was thinking last season.
No, he was a backup last season for Russell Wilson. And then I think he's going to be the best quarterback in that quarterback room. I think Bo Nix. The problem with Denver isn't necessarily the quarterback room, although it is now. They haven't done anything to help the quarterback. So I don't really care what quarterback they brought in here. That quarterback's going to struggle. And Bo Nix has proven
it's just poor management and just up there in Denver.
It is. But Bo Nix has proven with his moves in college, going to 2 different colleges and having so many different offensive coordinators, that he needs a stable environment to be successful. And I don't know if he's going to have that in Denver. Because I think
Denver has too many moving parts, and especially in upper management and coaching and stuff like that, to be stable. You need a GM to come in, go in and have a coach that's very passionate and wants to be there, and need a staff that wants to be there, or with players that want to be there, to be very supportive and have Bo Nix succeed. And I don't think Denver can offer that.
And you also need a salary cap, which they have the largest dead cap hit in the history of the NFL.
So they can't give him help either.
They can't afford it to go get help. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a throwaway year for Denver. I think they're picking in the top 5 next year. And then they might draft another quarterback. Who knows? So my steal of the draft is a little different than what everybody else has. It's Jackson Powers Johnson, also known as JPJ. He's a guard out of Oregon, drafted in the 2nd round by the Raiders. Now, the Raiders plan on moving him to guard. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people in the draft board thought he was going to be a center.
Yeah.
The Raiders just re-signed their center. Mm-hmm. And they have an all-pro center. What they don't have is a guard. This dude played both guard and center in college. 6'3", 328 pounds, 32 and a quarter inch arms with almost 10-inch hands. The dude's a beast.
He's massive.
Oh, yeah.
He is.
Oh, he's not tall, but he's big.
He's 328 pounds.
Oh, he's beefed.
He's not your 6'8" guy, but
Yeah.
he's also a guard. He's not your tackles. Like, your tackles are your tall guys.
Yeah.
Your guards and your centers
Are your beefy guys.
are your beefy guys.
The beef.
Jason Kelsey is not over 6'3". Just throwing that out there, right?
Nope.
Like, your interior dudes are not your tallest guys.
Well, you need your tackles to be long and lanky because they have to be able to push them off to the side and use their arms to their
and
advantage.
they need to be able
And
to
then
use...
tackles are more like this, like
So with that, I think he's a steal because he was graded as one of the best interior all linemen in the draft, and the Raiders, even though they went tight end in the first round, were still able to get one of the best interior offensive linemen early in the second round. So with that, I think we'll wrap up anything with the draft, unless there's anything either of you want to add about the draft.
Caleb Williams is a bust.
I'm
just going to end it there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to end on a hot take.
I'm going to let you end on that hot take, and we'll see what that turns into. So we'll transition really quickly into the last 2 weeks of NASCAR, because I know Dom is pretty fiery about this.
Oh, yeah.
And his hot takes. We can start with Talladega, and then we'll go to Dover.
Yeah, so overall, I'm just going to give y'all a quick recap. Some notable moves. Chastain started towards the back, and somehow within the first stage, I don't even know, first stage of stage 1, you can even call it, managed to squeeze his way up to second. Denny Hamlin messing it up on pit entry, possibly costing him a really, really good pit stop. And then throughout the race, not much else. Cindric taking stage 1, Logano stage 2. But the big talking point here is Michael McDowell's final lap block that cost so many drivers some really good points. Coming to the checkered flag, Michael McDowell is kind of blocking off Brad Keselowski coming to the line. At Talladega, the line is long. The line is all the way towards turn 1 opposed to the center of the main straight. And he throws one haymaker up the track and takes out everyone behind him. And in the end, he didn't even end up finishing himself. He ended up scoring a lap down, taking himself out of top 5 points, and just causing so much mayhem. I know, Luke, you watch NASCAR a little bit, at least.
So there's 2 takeaways that I have from this. One is that was Ford's first chance at a victory this year, which they still don't have one. Ford is struggling, to say the least. And 2, I loved how they talked about before that last lap that the last 2 times Keselowski was second in a restrictor plate race, it ended with wrecking.
Yes.
It did again, but it 1,000% was not his fault. Like, that was...
Yeah.
He did everything he was supposed to do to win that race, even checking up when the aggressive block was thrown on him to ensure that he didn't get wrecked. But what that checkup did was allow Reddick to get around him, who you could tell by watching never let off the throttle.
Not at all.
He was like, I'm either taking this or I'm joining the wreck. I don't care. Like, it was all or nothing, and he wound up weaving through there and crossing the finish line in first.
Yeah.
And I thought, 1, that was a smart move by Reddick, and 2, I saw 2 manufacturers kind of hose themselves. Even though Reddick did get the win for Toyota, there was another part of the race where every single Toyota was single file in line pushing each other, and then they wrecked with nobody else around them, leaving only 3 Toyotas left in the race.
Yeah, just, what was it? Coming out of pits, they're
Coming out
drafting
of
their way
pits.
along, and all of a sudden, Toyota terror strikes. But I will say, the one thing McDowell did well is take out the other Toyotas, because in scoring, Tyler Reddick first, and the closest Toyota is Martin Truex Jr. outside the top 10.
Well, because he got caught up in the wreck, yeah.
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 I mean, McDowell did his job. I will say that. Dover, bit of a shorter one, but overall, this was a pretty good race.
It was a good race, and I think a lot of the complaints that I've heard from this race is the way the cars are packaged. At the end of the race, Larson tracked down Denny Hamlin, but he just didn't have enough to get around him, and everybody is saying it's the way the car is designed. It doesn't allow for you to get a run on them, which partially I think might be the case. We've seen that at tracks before, but the other thing I see here is the fact that if this race was 5 laps longer,
Yeah.
Larson tracks him down and wins.
1000%.
Because the Chevys by far had a better long distance car in this. Toyotas had the better short distance car. It just so happened that the final stretch of the race was medium. It wasn't a long, it wasn't a short, so it gave time for Larson to catch him, but it didn't give enough time to pass him. So I don't blame the car necessarily for Larson not being able to get around him. It's the way it fell. And with that, Toyota gets another win, and Hamlin ties Lee Petty for 12th all-time in most Cup Series wins.
Yeah. I guess you can really sum up the sort of next-gen package as just an aero nightmare for these drivers. I mean, they took the horsepower away. You're kind of relying on this close aero racing. And now the cars have the virtual rear views, which Kyle Larson commented at the end of Dover saying that they should be taken away because when Larson was chasing down Hamlin, all Hamlin had to do is move his line, and that just cuts off the air, essentially, of this next-gen car. And, I can't really purely agree with Larson on the rear view cameras. I think if the cars were naturally able to perform better, that probably wouldn't even be brought up.
I agree, but I also think that one of the jobs of your spotter throughout the race is to tell you where the other guy is beating you.
Yep.
And even without the digital rear view, I feel like the spotter would have told Denny to run the same line anyways.
Yeah, even with the normal mirror.
Even with the normal mirror. The difference is he probably has a better view of how to do it, but it's going to happen regardless.
Yeah.
He's going to take that air away.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll discuss with this is the fact that, once again, Ford was nowhere near the finish.
Yep, nowhere near.
Nowhere near.
I mean, hey, they tried, but I think you know what I want to see? I want to see Jimmy Johnson at the Monster Mile prevail for Toyota after kind of betraying Chevy after all those years.
Yeah, he wasn't. Was he 3 laps down at the end?
He was a few down.
Yeah. That's what happens when you leave the sport and you come back in not great equipment, which is what he's driving. With that, I think we'll call that a show. For We Talk Sports, I'm Luke Hitchcock.
I'm Anthony De Silva.
And I'm Dominic Wright.
Have a great day.